Well, very shortly, here's what we do as an organization. We are a research institute on human behavior change. And it's kind of fun. It's basically trying to figure out why we as strange humans do the ridiculous things, wonderful things that we do, and more importantly, how do we change human behavior? From my perspective, that really is the role of a human resource executive. And that is to enliven, to uplift, to maximize the potential of individuals, but we all know how difficult it is to get an individual to move from X to Y. Yes or no? Yeah. And so we are pretty wonky in our belief system. In fact, the woman who runs our organization is the former CEO of Gallup Consulting. She was the one that with Marcus Buckingham and Tom Rath developed StrengthsFinder, which many of you I'm sure know, and the whole concept of employee engagement. She's come over to our organization to focus on, it's one thing to be able to measure this stuff. The question is, what scientifically proven mechanisms and interventions do we have to actually change the behavior? Right? So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is human behavior change. Human behavior change, which I believe is your role, not only for yourself, but for your organizations. Now, we do our own little diagnostics, and we're getting more and more sophisticated at them. I would like you to bring out a piece of paper and pencil, and I'm going to give you a very quick diagnostic to start the day with. Now, I'm going to read to you 4 shapes and sizes. 4 shapes and sizes. And of those 4 shapes and sizes, I want you to write one of them down. Whichever one sort of dominates your mind, jumps into the forefront of your thinking, don't question, ask, or judge what it is, just write one of them down. You ready? All right. So a circle, a triangle, a square, a Z. Circle, triangle, square, Z. Write one down. Now, by the way, has everyone got one now? If you haven't thought of one by now, that actually is a terribly embarrassing tell. So share it with somebody sitting next to you, what you have. You can share it with me if you'd like, sitting all by yourself. I wrote a book about this, Never Eat Alone. You're sitting there all by yourself. All right, you got it? Okay, circles, raise your hands. Wow. Okay, that's surprising and terribly disappointing. So here's the good news. Circles, out-of-the-box thinkers, embrace change, fairly fluid in being able to deal with change. The thing about you circles, though, is you subconsciously, very specifically avoided anything that boxed you in, made you feel claustrophobic or confined. Those straight sides, those pointy ends. As a result, I would say at least 40% of this audience, a particularly undisciplined group of individuals. And proud of it, apparently. How about the triangles? Triangles, raise your hands. Good. Keep them up. Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. Anybody sitting next to a triangle, be careful. They will do anything to get to the top of an organization as quickly as possible. The most ruthlessly blind people in the room. Figure out who they are, and for God's sakes, stay on their good sides. Who had a square? Who had a square? Wow, we've got an actuarial. There we go. An accountant in the back. Good. Excellent. The world needs of you, and by the way, all of those circles need you desperately. Find one of them, partner with them, team with them. By the way, the individuals who are squares do not mean that they're socially uninteresting. In fact, if you meet them, they're lovely people. They come to events like this. They collect business cards, like the rest of you. Just that they're going to go to the rooms tonight and enter the names in a database. That's who they are. The only ones in their organizations using some form of a CRM system. That's it, just them. Oh, and then, the Z's, right? The Z's. No, don't. Oh, no. Oh, no. What's your name? Jeannie. No, I would never ask a Z to raise their hand in front of their friends. Jeannie. Jeannie, from what we can tell, Z's just preoccupied with booze and sex. We've yet to find, by the way, does anybody want to join this table? Jeannie's inviting. Woo. No, I'm just kidding, Jeannie. The Z's are the ones, the nonconformists, normal triangle shape sizes, etc. They're going to do it their own way, Jeannie. Well, look, here's the thing. First of all, that was not statistically significant. I've been told by my Gallup associate that I'm not allowed to, I need to make that statement. But it is directionally correct in the following way. What we have found, what we've been studying for a long time is what we call relational and collaborative styles. What we find in human behavior change is that we've done a number of diagnostics in large corporations. What we try to do is we go into a large company like General Motors, and we ask the question, coming out of bankruptcy, what are the highest, interesting question, we're going to be talking about it in a little bit, what are the highest return behavior changes? Think about this for a second. What are the highest return behavior changes that will assure that General Motors comes out of bankruptcy? What are the highest return behavior changes in your sales force to assure that they can achieve the growth strategies? What are the highest return? And the thing about highest return behavior changes, it really is a question of who are the narrowest set of people that have to change the smallest set of behaviors in order to achieve a business result. Because guess what? How many people would agree with me? Behavior change is tough. Yes or no? Yes, very tough. So why do we go into organizations and pretend that we're going to change everyone's behaviors uniformly across the organization? We say things like culture change. Guess what? None of you in this room changes culture. You don't change culture. You change individual behaviors if you're lucky. And individual behaviors added up in the aggregation, when you step back and look at it, it creates a culture. I bet from space the planet looks fairly homogeneous and beautiful, right? This little round blue bubble. But get down into the nuts and bolts of it, and what you end up finding is that it's really a set of microcultures. Microcultures that get things done and don't get things done and stop and hurt and get in the way of everything, right? So those microcultures, it's a surgical and a strategic analysis to figure out what's the highest return behavior change. Now, that opens up a really interesting strategic question. If you do nothing more than take that idea back to your executive committee and sit and think about that for a long time, what are the highest return behavior changes that will make us meet our strategic objectives? Is that a good question? So we're going to talk about that today a little bit. And what we found is, as we look at this question of highest return behavior change, what we find is that inevitably the highest return behavior changes end up coming down to behavior changes that are relational or collaborative. Why is that? I'll tell you why. Because historically, we have pretty much been very good at what I would call the operational behaviors. We've been very good at a lot of the behaviors. We have been very logical and analytical about figuring out what people should do, when you can skill train them up. But when you start dealing with that soft stuff, that's all of a sudden the purview of no man's land. We throw it over to the HR department if we're lucky. Or we don't even think about it as a business leader, because for God's sakes, we told them what they had to do. Why aren't they doing it? I would rather just continue as a leader to be frustrated that they're not doing it. Why? Because it's scary and we don't know how to make them change. So we throw it over to the HR department, and unfortunately the resources that you're given to do it aren't sufficient. Human behavior change is tough. And then you go about trying to change the behaviors of the organization with some culture change project. You analyze them at the aggregate, and you put out these big value statements and big words. We should be more collaborative. We should be. What the heck does that mean? Ultimately, it doesn't mean anything until you break it down to a specific practice for a specific job. You train and coach at the practice level, not at the aggregate level. Your organization and your people, God bless them, there's no way they're going to be able to figure out what does it mean to be more collaborative. The day that they walk into the office, they're falling back into their old same behaviors. They could get very evangelical and excited about this collaborative word, but at the end of the day, they're going to fall back into old behaviors unless you specifically tell them what the daily practice is in a specific situation given their job, so that they could try that, like it, and go on and do more. We call it eyedroppers of change over an extended period of time creates human behavior change. Listen, if it was just about training, there are certain things you can train and do differently. But when you're dealing with real behavior change, particularly around this soft, difficult stuff, if it was just training, then nobody would need a ho-ho. What do I mean by that? How many of us have been on diets and we still do stuff we shouldn't? Raise your hands. You know you shouldn't, right? Raise your hands. Yes, of course you know you shouldn't, but what you do? You eat the ho-ho. If it was just about knowing what you had to do, you do it. It's not about training. It's not about knowledge. It's about human behavior change. Your organizations are actually addicted to old behaviors, old familiar behaviors. I use a big word called addiction because I have to tell you, we have spent 10 years benchmarking human behavior change in the workplace, looking at what cultures really have changed and why, and what individuals have changed and why. And I have to tell you, I love you people. You are my people. This is where the world changes. You know, at some point in my life, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a Methodist minister. And I realized that I could do more good here in front of HR than I could in front of the pulpit once a week, because y'all have them 5 days a week. And I figured if I could help the world do what I wanted to do, spread my mission and my movement and my inspiration, and I could help that be eyedroppers of change over an extended period of time. Literally 5 days a week, we have the trust of individuals' behaviors and lives. And if we do it right, we have more impact than somebody who has them 1 day a week, although that one person's got a little help that maybe your leadership team doesn't provide you. But nonetheless, come on back to this. What I'm saying is that we studied all of the human behavior change in the workplace, and guess what? We don't have the ticket in HR. We don't. There aren't many examples of significant human behavior change that have come in the workplace. In fact, all the studies, 20 years ago, John Kotter, y'all know John Kotter? Great professor at Harvard Business School. He studied human behavior change, found that change in the workplace succeeds about 30% of the time. Does that sound about right to you? It's true and statistically significant. 20 years later, McKinsey did a study. Guess how much change in the workplace happens? 30% of the time. I don't think there's anything magical about that other than we have not cracked the code. So I decided to look as to where to crack the code. We're not going to find it in the workplace. So what I decided to do is look weird places. We did look at evangelical ministers that were creating a movement in a community, and more people were joining their church and supposedly changing behaviors. We looked at Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers has a higher statistical weight loss program than other weight loss programs. Why was that? Well, we dug into it and realized it wasn't because that in Weight Watchers they have a better diet, but Weight Watchers have an ingrained accountability, a peer-to-peer accountability of the weigh-ins, of this peer support, of the encouragement. Now ask yourself, do you have peer-to-peer support and encouragement and accountability among your organizations as you're going through change? We looked at AA. One of the most debilitative, addictive behaviors, and yet people are finding sobriety through that program 1 day at a time, small doses of incremental change over an extended period of time. They get peer coaching. They get expert peer coaching in the rooms 1 day when they show up. Imagine if we could turn our staff meetings into learning experiences where people show up to the staff meeting, their equivalent of a room, and learn something that day, 1 day at a time. Imagine if that group cared about each other enough that they showed up in support of each other to have each other's back, which is what we find in 12-step programs that work. We looked at the 12-step programs that had higher degrees of sobriety than others and asked what was it about those that had it. And these are individuals that had higher degrees of sponsorship, which we might call mentorship in the workplace. Right, so we went everywhere, and we're coming out with a new book on this subject. So in about a year, we'll have documented it. In the meantime, we'll have an HBR piece on this topic of how we went to unorthodox places to figure out and crack the code of human behavior change. What I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to try to give you a sampling of two things. One, on the aggregate, what are the levers to pull around human behavior change? This is one of the first times I've given this talk, actually. I'm so excited about it and a little bit fearful that all the slides will work out. But the first thing is, am I getting all of the levers? What are the major levers of human behavior change? We're going to talk about that I hope you will apply in your workplaces and for yourself. The second thing we're going to do is I'm going to then apply it to what we have found statistically is that of all the organizations that we study, the behavior changes that are most difficult to change and that are unchanged are the relational and collaborative ones. Again, why? Because they're the least curated. They're the most fuzzy. They're the most fearful of analytically, operationally minded business people who then don't get it, so they ignored it altogether. We've wrung enough blood out of the turnip of the other behavior changes that are more operational. It's in this soft skills, relational stuff that really matters. So we have been spending a good bit of time over the last 10 years intently, and this has been a pursuit of mine since I was at Harvard Business School working with a group of individuals in the services industry doing the service profit chain research almost 20 years ago with Len Schlesinger, Earl Hasker, Hart, Sasser, et cetera. Great group of folks. And I'm really trying to extend that work in today. So what we're going to talk about, though, is human behavior change. And I have to tell you, first of all, how many of you, now with all that in the background, how many of you think people's behavior can really change? Yes or no? Raise your hands if it's a yes. Okay, reasonable. Raise your hands if it's a no. Okay, I'm fine with it. There's a lot of people out there that say, at the end of the day, people can't change. People can't change. Well, I'm going to change your behavior this morning, right here. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to change your behavior, and it will be purposeful and it won't be difficult. I'm going to start with a little bit of a story of how it's possible. So one of the things we did is sociologically, and by the way, our work tugs at 3 different areas: psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Psychology is, I used to think that we were all about psychology. Our work would be, how do we shrink people's heads into behaving differently, right? And so we had a bunch of therapists, a bunch of psychiatrists. It was great. They can medicate all of our people, which is really good. And we started studying the psychology of human behavior change. The problem is this. Guess what? Your behaviors are locked and loaded by what age? Anybody have a guess? 3. 3. Yeah, maybe 6. 3. Okay? By the way, how many of you have children over the age of 3? See, the good news is you already screwed them up. Don't worry, just relax now. So if that's true, that depressed me, because here I am trying to crack the code of human behavior, and I find out that you're locked and loaded by 3. And then what happens is, for the rest of your life, you, particularly on the relational side, where you fit in the construct of family and people is locked and loaded when you're a little reptilian-brained animal waddling around, and you're interpreting your environment, you're saying what's safe and what's unsafe. And because that's at the end, at the core of your soft skills, your relational skills, your collaborative skills, your leadership skills, that the core of it is your one of 2 perspectives. It really boils down to your safety with others. Do you create an environment around yourself that invites people in to build a relationship with you? That has to do with whether you feel safe. You look at somebody and you say, anthropologically, meaning going back 70,000 years when you were a tribal individual in a tribe somewhere in Africa, right? Which is where we all came from. If that's true, then you're looking at somebody, you're like, are they us or are they them? Are they going to eat me? Or is this a member of my tribe? That anthropological thing is going on in your little reptilian head. That's the fight-flight mechanism. That's a pick up a snake or hug a mountain lion and no thank you, right? Some of you in this room walk into this room and see mountain lions and snakes because you've got overactive reptilian brains that say unsafe, them. Others of you walk into this room and say, hoo-hoo, this is my family, this is my tribe, these are my friends. Do you know what I'm talking about? And what we found when we were studying relational styles, it does not mean charisma. That has nothing to do with whether or not you're bounding into the room with open arms. How many of you know somebody who has very big social styles, right? But you don't trust them. You know what I'm talking about? Right.